The morning Charlotte slipped into the Royal Archive room was a Tuesday, which felt like the right kind of day for a mistake you can't undo. Tuesdays have no ceremony. Nobody expects anything from a Tuesday. That was the point. She had been watching Princess Catherine for 3 months by then. Not in any way that could be called surveillance, not in any way that could be called obsession, at least, that is what she told herself in the quiet hours before sleep, when the ceiling of her small rented room in Windsor stared back at her with the particular blankness of something that knows more than it lets on. Charlotte Bellamy, 31 years old, assistant archivist on a temporary contract, daughter of a woman who had spent 20 years cleaning other people's homes, had told herself she was simply doing her job. Observing. Cataloging. Making note of patterns. That is what archivists do. They observe. They catalog. They make note of patterns. The pattern she had noticed was this: every third Tuesday, Princess Catherine came to the archive personally. Not through a secretary, not through a lady-in-waiting. Herself. She would walk in wearing something deliberately understated, a navy coat, flat shoes, hair pulled back with the kind of simplicity that costs more than most people's rent, and she would ask for a specific folder. The same folder, every third Tuesday, for the last 3 months. Charlotte had never opened that folder. She had thought about it. She had stood in front of the filing cabinet at the end of her shift, her hand resting on the cool metal handle, and thought about it very seriously. Then, she had gone home and eaten toast over the sink and not thought about it at all, which is its own kind of thinking. The thing that changed on this particular Tuesday was small. It was, in fact, a paper jam. The archive's main scanner, a large, temperamental machine that the senior archivist, Mr. Hargreaves, treated with the reverence most people reserve for elderly relatives, had jammed at 9:30 in the morning. Mr. Hargreaves had gone to find the technician. The 2 junior staff had taken their tea break. And Charlotte had been left alone in the room with the filing cabinet and the kind of silence that doesn't feel like silence at all. It feels like a held breath. She told herself later that she had only meant to look at the label. The folder was plain. Buff-colored, the standard issue used across every government archive in the country, the kind of folder that could contain anything from agricultural census data to architectural surveys of listed buildings. The label read, in typed letters that had slightly faded at the edges, Medical Consultation, Personal, C.M.W. The initials stopped Charlotte's hand mid-reach. C.M.W. She knew those initials. The entire country knew those initials, even if most of them had never seen them written in this particular way, stripped of titles, stripped of context, reduced to 3 letters on a buff-colored folder in a room that smelled of old paper and low-grade anxiety. Charlotte Bellamy, who had been 12 years old when Diana died and had sat on the carpet in front of the television and watched the world cry, who had grown up reading every book and article and long-form piece she could find about the way royalty moved through the world and what it cost them, Charlotte Bellamy opened the folder. What was inside did not look like much. That was the first thing. She had expected something dramatic. Something that announced itself. What she found instead were scan images, medical imaging. She recognized the format from her brief stint as an admin temp at a regional hospital 6 years ago, printed on standard A4 paper. Several sheets. A date at the top of the first page. A brief notation in a handwriting she did not recognize. Technical language she could partially parse and partially could not. She stood there for 47 seconds. She counted them later, working backward from the moment she heard footsteps in the corridor, and she arrived at 47. In those 47 seconds, Charlotte did something she had not planned, had not consciously decided, had not even fully registered doing until it was already done. She walked to the scanner, the secondary scanner, the small desktop one used for overflow documents, not the temperamental main machine that Mr. Hargreaves treated like a relative, and she fed the first page through. The machine was quiet. It was efficient. It did not jam. She fed through 3 pages before the footsteps in the corridor became a knock at the door and she shoved the folder back into the cabinet with hands that were steady in a way that scared her, because she had expected them to shake and they did not. Mr. Hargreaves came back with the technician. Charlotte smiled at them both. She finished her shift. She took the bus home. She ate toast over the sink. The scan images were on the archive's internal server, timestamped, logged with her access credentials, waiting. She did not know that yet. The thing about the royal family that most people misunderstand is the machinery. Not the public machinery, the carriages and the ceremonies and the carefully choreographed walkabouts, but the private machinery. The systems. The protocols that run beneath every photograph and every public appearance like plumbing beneath the floor. You don't see it. You don't think about it. But it is there, and it works, and when something disrupts it, the disruption is detected with the quiet efficiency of a body detecting a foreign cell. Senior Guard Malcolm Rees had worked Royal Protection Detail for 14 years. He was not the kind of man who described himself in those terms at dinner parties. He was not, in fact, the kind of man who went to dinner parties. He was 53 years old, built in the way that large furniture is built, solidly, without decoration, and he had developed over 14 years a quality that his colleagues called instinct and that he himself called pattern recognition. Things that are out of place have a texture. A temperature. He had learned to feel it before he could name it. He was reviewing the archive access logs on a Wednesday, routine work, the kind of low-level monitoring that runs on a rolling basis across all sensitive locations, when the texture changed. A secondary scanner. An access timestamp outside normal workflow. A set of scanned documents logged under an archivist's credentials that did not correspond to any active cataloging project. He sat with this for a moment. Then, he cross-referenced the document identifiers against the restricted access list. Malcolm Rees was not a man who used the word "oh" very often. He used it now, quietly, to the empty room. Charlotte did not know she was being watched. That is not quite accurate. She was aware, in the abstract way that everyone who works in proximity to royalty is aware, that monitoring exists, that cameras exist, that nothing is quite as private as it appears. But abstract awareness is a different thing from felt knowledge. She moved through her days with the low-grade static of having done something she could not undo, which was unpleasant but not unbearable, and she told herself various things in various sequences to make it manageable. She told herself she had not looked at the scans properly. This was partially true. She had seen them for 47 seconds and had understood approximately 40% of what she was looking at, which meant she had not fully understood anything. She told herself she had not shared them with anyone. This was completely true. She told herself the scan on the server was an accident. A procedural error. A thing that happened in the confusion of the paper jam and the footsteps and the 47 seconds. This was not true at all, but she told herself it with some conviction. On Friday, 6 days after the Tuesday in question, she arrived at work to find that her access card did not open the archive door. She tried it twice. The light blinked red both times with a patience that felt, in that moment, very much like contempt. She stood in the corridor for a long moment. Then, Senior Guard Malcolm Rees came around the corner, and he was accompanied by a woman Charlotte did not recognize. Civilian clothes, the particular quality of stillness that Charlotte had learned, by now, to associate with people who are paid to be unobtrusive, and he said her name in the tone of a man who has already read every document he needs to read. Charlotte thought, toast. She thought about eating toast over the sink and not thinking about things, which is its own kind of thinking. "Miss Bellamy," Malcolm said, "could you come with us, please?" It was not a question. The grammar of it was a question. The weight of it was not. She went. The room they took her to was on the administrative level, a floor below the archive, painted in the particular shade of institutional cream that exists specifically to make people feel that their situation is serious without being so alarming that they require legal counsel immediately. There was a table. There were 3 chairs. There was a glass of water that Charlotte did not touch. The woman in civilian clothes, she introduced herself as Davies, just Davies, no first name, no title, set a tablet on the table and turned it to face Charlotte. The access log. The timestamp. The document identifiers. Charlotte looked at it for a long moment. Then, she said, "I can explain." Davies said, very gently, "Please do." And Charlotte, who had been rehearsing various versions of the explanation since the red light blinked at her in the corridor, found that every version she had prepared dissolved in the particular solvent of being looked at by someone who already knows the answer to the question they are asking. She said, "I didn't mean to." Davies waited. "I was going to delete it," Charlotte said. "The scan. Off the server. I hadn't found the right moment." "The scan has been on the server for 6 days," Davies said, without inflection. Charlotte looked at the water glass. It was very precisely placed, equidistant from both sides of its half of the table, the kind of precise placement that is either accidental or deliberate, and, in this room she suspected it was deliberate. "What was in the folder?" she said, and it came out not as a question. Is the Princess Miss Bellamy?" Davies said, and her voice shifted in a way that was not unkind but was very firm. "That is not something we're going to discuss today." Charlotte nodded. Her hands were very still on the table. She noticed them being still and thought again about the 47 seconds, about how her hands had not shaken then, either, and she wondered what that said about her that she was only now starting to find alarming. The room held its breath. Outside, somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. Charlotte Bellamy sat in the institutional cream room and understood, for the first time, with the full weight of felt knowledge rather than abstract awareness, that what she had done in 47 seconds on a Tuesday was going to take considerably longer than that to come undone. The investigation, as Davies explained it to her in the institutional cream room, was not yet an investigation. It was a review. The distinction mattered, apparently, in ways that Charlotte was not yet positioned to understand but would be helped to understand in due course. She was told this with the particular courtesy that institutions extend to people they have not yet decided what to do with, a provisional courtesy, held at a slight distance, like someone handing you a cup of coffee they might need to take back. She was suspended on full pay. Her access was revoked. She was asked not to discuss the matter with colleagues, friends, or family members. She was given a contact number for a legal advisory service retained by the institution, which she could call or not call as she saw fit. She did not call it. She went home to her small rented room in Windsor and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. Not thinking, or doing the kind of not thinking that fills up the space where thinking should be. The ceiling stared back at her with its usual blankness. Outside her window, the street went on in the way streets go on, indifferent, continuous, unaware that anything had changed. Her phone buzzed. Her mother. Charlotte watched the screen until it stopped buzzing, then set the phone face down on the bedside table. Her mother had cleaned the homes of people with money for 20 years. Had come home with her hands rough and her back bent and had put Charlotte's dinner on the table with the particular dignity of someone who understood precisely how the world was arranged and had decided to find meaning in it anyway. Charlotte had watched this and had grown up with one unspoken engine running underneath everything she did: I will not clean their houses. I will be inside them. I will be one of the people who belongs. She had not cleaned their houses. She had catalogued their documents. She had been, for 3 years of a temporary contract, inside the rooms where the important things were kept. And then, on a Tuesday that had no ceremony, she had done something that a person who belonged would never do, because a person who belongs does not need to. She picked up her phone and called her mother back. "You sound strange," her mother said, before Charlotte had finished saying hello. "I'm fine," Charlotte said. Her mother did not say anything to this, which was its own kind of commentary. "I made a mistake at work," Charlotte said. "How bad?" Charlotte looked at the ceiling. "I'm not sure yet." Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you eating?" "Yes." "Toast doesn't count." Charlotte almost laughed. It came out as a breath that was shaped like a laugh but didn't quite have the weight for it. "I know," she said. She did not tell her mother about the folder. About the scan. About Davies sitting across a table with a tablet turned to face her and a glass of water placed with institutional precision. She did not tell her mother about the initials CMW on a buff-colored folder or about the way 47 seconds can rearrange the structure of a life. She said she would call again soon. She hung up. She ate toast over the sink. Malcolm Rees filed his report on the Thursday. It was thorough, as his reports always were, organized in the way that experience organizes things, not by drama but by relevance, each element placed where it could be found without having to look for it. He had been doing this for 14 years. He had seen people do foolish things in proximity to the royal family many times. He had seen obsession dressed as admiration. He had seen ambition dressed as loyalty. He had seen ordinary people, decent in their daily lives, do things that surprised them as much as anyone else when they stood in the particular gravity field of proximity to power. What struck him about Charlotte Bellamy was not what she had done. It was the 47 seconds. He had reviewed the secondary scanner's operational log. It recorded every document fed through it, with timestamps to the second, and the gap between the first scan and the moment she replaced the folder was 47 seconds. 3 pages. 47 seconds. She had not lingered. She had not read the documents carefully. She had scanned them and put them back and stood there while the machine did what machines do. He sat with this. There was a difference, in his experience, between someone who planned a thing and someone who was overtaken by it. He had seen both. He had learned to tell them apart not by what they did, the action was often identical, but by the quality of what came after. The planner was careful afterward. The overtaken person stood in the corridor with a red blinking access card and a face that had not yet processed the distance between the intention they thought they had and the thing they had done. He was not a man who made judgments about people. He made assessments. He made reports. He flagged what needed to be flagged and placed each element where it could be found. The report went up the chain. The chain moved in the way that chains move, each link passing the weight to the next, the weight growing as it traveled. What nobody had yet told Charlotte was that the scans had been reviewed by a specialist team within 48 hours of Malcolm's initial flag. That the documents were confirmed as relating to a specific and ongoing medical consultation. That the question of what Charlotte knew or had understood, or had partially understood, or had understood and then not thought about because not thinking is its own kind of thinking, was now a matter of active concern at a level several floors above the institutional cream room where she had sat with an untouched glass of water. She was called back in on a Monday. 10 days after the Tuesday. She had spent those 10 days in a state that she would later describe, to a therapist she eventually found the courage to see, as suspended. Not suspended in the bureaucratic sense, though that too. Suspended in the physical sense, the sensation of having stepped off a ledge and not yet reached the ground. Davies was there again. This time there was also a man Charlotte had not seen before, who wore the kind of suit that announces its own quality without drawing attention to itself, and who was introduced only as Mr. Alastair. His face was arranged in an expression of benign neutrality that Charlotte recognized, from 3 years inside these rooms, as the expression of someone whose job is to determine consequences. The tablet was not on the table this time. There was, instead, a printed document. 1 page. Single-spaced. Charlotte recognized the format. It was a formal statement of facts, the kind prepared before a meeting in which decisions are communicated rather than discussed. She read it in the way she had learned to read difficult documents, quickly, to understand the structure first, then, slowly, to understand the substance. The substance was this: she had accessed restricted medical documents belonging to a member of the royal family. She had digitally reproduced 3 pages of those documents without authorization. The reproduction had been stored on a secure server, accessed only by authorized investigative personnel, and had not been further distributed. Her account of events, that she had not intended to distribute the material, had not shared it with any third party, and had intended to delete it, had been reviewed and was considered, provisionally, credible. The word provisionally sat in the middle of that sentence like a stone in a river. The document went on. There were conditions. There were non-disclosure requirements, formalized and legally binding. There was the matter of her employment contract, which would be terminated. There was, at the bottom, a section she read 3 times because she could not initially understand what it was saying, and then understood, and had to set the paper down for a moment. She was going to be asked to meet with a representative of the princess directly. Not the princess herself. A representative. But, still. Charlotte looked up from the document. Mr. Alastair was watching her with his benign neutrality. Davies had her hands folded on the table with the patience of someone who has had this conversation many times in various forms. "Why?" Charlotte said. The word came out very flat and plain, without the question mark she had intended to attach to it. Mr. Alastair said, "There are things the princess's office would like to understand. About me. About what you saw. What you understood. What your intentions were." Charlotte thought about intentions. She had spent 10 days thinking about intentions. She had arrived, through various routes of self-examination, at a place that was not comfortable but was at least honest. She had not intended to scan those documents. She had not intended to distribute them. But she had also not resisted scanning them, had stood with her hand on the folder for a moment that was long enough to be a choice, and the difference between not intending something and not resisting it was the kind of difference that only feels small until you are sitting in a room where it is being measured precisely. "All right," she said. Mr. Alastair nodded. Davies made a note. The room held its quiet, institutional breath. The meeting was arranged for the following Thursday. Charlotte was told to arrive at a particular entrance of a particular building, not a public entrance, the kind of entrance that does not appear on any visitor map, and to ask for a name she was given verbally rather than in writing. She was told what to wear in terms of what not to wear, which amounted to the same guidance, and she was told that the meeting would last no longer than 45 minutes. She spent the intervening days in a state she recognized, distantly, as the state her mother sometimes moved through, a kind of steady, practical endurance that did not admit drama because drama is a luxury, and some situations require you to simply keep moving through them and do what needs to be done and not fall apart in the process, because falling apart is something you do on your own time and not in the room where it matters. She bought a new blouse. Nothing expensive. Something considered. She pressed it herself, early Thursday morning, on the small ironing board that folded out from the back of her wardrobe, and she thought about her mother pressing uniforms over a kitchen table 20 years ago, and she thought about rooms and who belongs in them, and she pressed the blouse until it was perfect. She ate breakfast. Not toast. Eggs. She sat at the table to eat them, which felt like a kind of discipline. She took the bus. Not because she could not afford a cab, the formal process had clarified certain practical matters, but because she needed the ordinary rhythm of the bus, the stops, the other passengers with their ordinary faces and their ordinary problems, to carry her to the door of something that was not ordinary at all without losing the thread of herself entirely. She got off 3 stops early and walked. Windsor in October has a particular quality in the morning. The light arrives at a low angle and turns everything it touches gold for approximately 40 minutes before the clouds come back. Charlotte walked through those 40 minutes without her phone, without music, without anything to hold on to except the feel of the pavement under her feet and the cool weight of the air. She thought about what she would say. She had been told that the representative would ask questions, and that she should answer them as completely and honestly as she was able. She had been told this in the tone people use when they mean, do not perform contrition, do not perform innocence, do not perform anything at all. Just answer. What would she say when they asked her why she had opened the folder? She had been sitting with this for 10 days. The answer that was true but insufficient was, I wanted to know. The answer that was true and slightly more uncomfortable was, I wanted to know something about her that most people don't know. The answer that sat beneath that one, the answer she had found in the small hours before sleep when the ceiling was most candid with her, was something she had no tidy words for yet. She had spent her life on the outside of rooms. She had spent 3 years inside a room full of the documentation of power and privilege and private lives, cataloging it, making it orderly, making it accessible to people with the right credentials. She had never had the right credentials for anything except the catalog itself. And, when the thing in the folder had been right there, the private, human, vulnerable thing underneath all the credentials and the titles and the navy coats and the flat shoes, she had reached for it with hands that did not shake. Not because she wanted to hurt anyone. Not because she had planned anything. But because for 47 seconds she had wanted the distance between herself and that other life to be the width of a scanner and nothing more. She had reached the entrance. An unremarkable door. She stood in front of it. She thought, this is where the 47 seconds end and something else begins. She rang the bell. The woman who met her at the door was not Davies. She was younger than Charlotte had expected, with the kind of face that has learned to be unreadable in the same way certain buildings have learned to be unassuming, deliberately, through effort, at some cost. Her name was Priya. She offered Charlotte a seat in a waiting area that was furnished with the specific quality of comfort that communicates both wealth and the absence of any desire to impress. 2 chairs. A low table. A window that looked onto a courtyard where something was beginning to lose its leaves with the particular reluctance of things that know winter is coming and have not yet decided to accept it. Charlotte sat. Priya sat across from her, not behind a desk, which Charlotte noted. No desk meant no barrier. No barrier meant something, though she was not yet certain what. The princess wanted you to know, Priya began, that this meeting was her suggestion. Not Mr. Alastair's. Not the security team's. Charlotte looked at her. That matters to you? Priya said. It changes the shape of things, Charlotte said. Yes. Priya nodded. There was something in the nod that was not approval exactly, but was at least acknowledgement that an honest answer had arrived where an honest answer was needed. She set a notepad on the table between them, then put a pen beside it and did not pick it up. I need to ask you some questions, she said. Some of them will be about what you saw. Some of them will be about why you think you did what you did. I'm going to ask you to be as honest as you can. Not because the answers will necessarily change your situation in a practical sense, she paused, choosing the next words with care, but because the princess would like to understand. As a person. The human version of what happened. Not the security version. Charlotte understood this, in the way you understand something that you have been carrying without a name for it and are suddenly given the name. She said, all right. The questions Priya asked were not what Charlotte had prepared for, which was the point of them. She had expected to be asked what exactly she had seen on the scans. She was not asked this. She had expected to be asked whether she had told anyone. She was asked this once, early, and, when Charlotte said no, Priya moved on without pressing it further, which Charlotte had not anticipated. She was asked, instead, what had she been thinking about that morning, before she arrived at work. She was asked whether she had slept well the night before the Tuesday. She was asked about her relationship with the archive, with the work, with the particular quality of satisfaction she got from the job when it was going well. Charlotte answered these questions. She answered them with increasing honesty as the conversation moved, the way water finds its level when you stop directing it. She talked about the catalog. She talked about the satisfaction of making order from disorder, which was real and was something she had never articulated before because it had never needed articulation. She talked about 3 years of a temporary contract, renewed and never made permanent, and what that feels like in the body, the constant slight instability of a floor that might give way. Did you feel unseen? Priya asked. Not cruelly. With the directness of someone who has been given permission to ask. Charlotte considered this. I felt correctly seen, she said. Which is worse? I was seen as what I was. An assistant archivist on a temporary contract. That is accurate. I just didn't want it to be the whole picture. Priya wrote something on the notepad. Charlotte could not see what. What did you want the rest of the picture to be? Charlotte looked at the window. The tree in the courtyard had lost another leaf while they were talking. She had watched it happen, peripherally. I don't know that I wanted it to be anything specific, she said. I think I wanted to know that there was a rest of the picture. That I was capable of being somewhere other than the outside of things. The room was quiet for a moment. And, the folder, Priya said carefully. When you opened it, what did you feel? This was the question Charlotte had been circling for 2 weeks. She had orbited it at various distances, coming close and, then, pulling back, the way you pull back from something that gives off more heat than you expected. I felt recognized, she said. And, then, immediately ashamed of feeling recognized. Because that's not what it was. What was in that folder wasn't about me. It was about her. It was the most private possible thing about her. And, she stopped. Restarted. I had collapsed the distance between us in the worst possible way. I used her privacy to make myself feel like I was on the inside. That's not recognition. That's trespass. The word came out with a particular weight, because she had arrived at it alone, without anyone handing it to her, and it had cost her something to arrive there. Priya did not write anything this time. She set the pen down entirely. The princess read a summary of your personnel file, she said. Your work record. Your academic record. The interview notes from when you were first taken on. She paused. She asked me to tell you something. Charlotte waited. She said, she understands the impulse better than you might expect her to. Charlotte said nothing. Her hands were still on her lap. 14 years of watching people in proximity to royalty, and Malcolm Rees had seen hands shake and hands go still, and he would have known from Charlotte's stillness that the words had landed somewhere real. The princess isn't absolving what happened, Priya continued. The legal requirements stand. Your employment contract stands in its current status. None of that changes. But she wanted you to know that she read the summary, and she wanted the conversation to happen, and she wanted. Priya paused again, finding the precise thing. She wanted it understood that what was in that folder is hers. It belongs to her. Not in the abstract sense. In the very specific, very human sense. She is the one living in it. Charlotte's throat tightened. She swallowed it. I know, Charlotte said. I know that. I knew it before I opened the folder, and I opened it anyway. Yes, Priya said. That's the part one have to sit with. Yes. They talked for another 20 minutes. The conversation became, in its second half, something that Charlotte had not expected, less formal, less structured, more like two people in a room acknowledging together the texture of something complicated. Priya talked about her own work, obliquely, in terms of the difficulty of being the person who exists between two parties who cannot speak directly to each other. Charlotte talked about the archive, about what it means to spend your days with the documentation of other people's lives and how that does something to you over time that you don't notice until you notice it. When Priya stood to indicate the meeting was ending, she held out her hand. Charlotte shook it. The NDA covers everything discussed today as well, Priya said, back in her professional register, clean and clear. You understand that? Yes. And, the contact for the legal advisory service, you should use it. Not because you're in immediate legal jeopardy. But, because having someone in your corner while this is being resolved is sensible. Charlotte nodded. She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door of the waiting room and, then, turned back. The scans, she said. What I saw. I understood about 30% of it. I knew it was serious. I want you to know I haven't spent any time speculating. I haven't tried to work out more than I saw. Priya looked at her. I believe you, she said. But, I'll pass that on. Charlotte nodded once more. She left. Malcolm Rees, who had been in a room down the corridor for the duration of the meeting in case he was needed and had not been needed, filed a supplementary report that afternoon. It was brief. It noted that the meeting had concluded without incident, that Charlotte Bellamy had conducted herself within expected parameters, and that his preliminary assessment that she was an overtaken person rather than a planning one had not been revised by anything observed today. He noted, in the final line, that the matter was concluded pending legal process and did not require further security review. Then, he closed the file and went home and made himself dinner and did not think about Charlotte Bellamy again until the following week, when the full formal report landed on his desk and he annealed it and sent it back up the chain, and that was the last of it, for him. Charlotte called the legal advisory service on a Friday. The solicitor she spoke to was methodical and kind and spent 40 minutes explaining what would happen and in what order and what Charlotte should and should not do, and by the end of the call Charlotte understood her situation in the way you understand a map, not the territory itself, but where you are in it and which direction leads out. Her contract was terminated formally in November. She was given a settlement that was larger than she had expected, accompanied by a non-disclosure agreement that she signed without drama. She cleared her desk on a Tuesday, which felt appropriate. She took the bus home with a box of things that included a mug, 3 books, a cardigan she had left in a desk drawer and forgotten about, and a small framed print of a painting that had hung on the wall above her monitor, a detail from something larger, just the corner of a room in a Dutch interior, a window with light coming through it at a low angle, the specific gold of a particular kind of morning. She put the box in the corner of her small room and looked at it for a while. Then, she made eggs for dinner, sitting at the table. She called her mother. She told her more than she had told her before, though not everything, not the initials, not the scans, not the institutional cream room or the glass of water placed with particular precision. But, more. Her mother listened in the way her mother always listened, which is without commentary until the end, and, at the end she said, "You've always known exactly where you wanted to be. The problem is you kept thinking wanting was the same as belonging." Charlotte sat with this for a long time after she hung up. She sat with it the way you sit with something that is more useful than comfortable. In December she applied for a full-time archivist position at a university library. Not a temporary contract. A full position, open to candidates with her level of experience, in a place that housed documents with no restricted access list, no security protocols, no buff-colored folders with 3 loaded initials on the label. Just old things, carefully kept. She got an interview in January. She sat across from a panel of 3 academics who asked her about her approach to cataloging and her experience with damaged materials and her thoughts on the ethics of archival access. That question, that last one, landed in front of her and she answered it carefully, from a place that was not prepared but was honest, and something in her answer made the panel member who had asked it sit back slightly and nod in the way someone nods when they hear an answer that is more considered than they expected. She got the job. She started in February. What happened after that happened slowly, in the way that things happen when the drama has passed and ordinary life reasserts itself with the patient consistency of weather. She learned the collection. She learned the rhythms of the building, the quality of light at different times of day in different reading rooms, the particular smell of the older stacks, which is not unpleasant if you have chosen this work because you love it and not because of what it puts you in proximity to. She did not follow the news about Princess Catherine more or less than she had before. She noticed this about herself without judgment. She had not stopped caring, but she had stopped reaching, which was different. She had arrived, over several months of sitting with uncomfortable things, at a relationship with the distance between her life and other lives that was honest rather than performed. The distance was real. It was not her enemy. It was simply the shape of things. She thought about her mother. 20 years of cleaning other people's homes, coming back with rough hands and a straight back and a dignity that had never required proximity to power to sustain itself. Charlotte had spent years understanding this as a wound, as a thing to escape from. She was beginning, slowly, to understand it differently. There is a kind of strength that grows in rooms where you are not watched. A kind of knowing that cannot be obtained from the outside of the folder. Her mother had known this her whole adult life. Charlotte was learning it now, at 31, in a university library full of documents that had no restricted access list. Malcolm Rees retired in March. The file was archived properly, with the correct metadata, in the appropriate location, by someone whose hands did not shake and did not stay too still either. He went home to a house in Hampshire where his wife had a garden that needed attention and he had 14 years of pattern recognition that was useful in gardens in the same way it was useful in the job. Which is to say, you learn the difference between what is out of place and what is simply growing, and you learn not to confuse the two. In April, Charlotte found a folder in the university archive that had been misfiled. It was not buff-colored. It was a dark green cardboard folder, from the 1960s, containing correspondence between 2 academics arguing about something she had to look up to understand. It had been sitting in the wrong location for at least 40 years, waiting for someone to find it and put it where it belonged. She held it for a moment. Then, she walked it to the correct shelf, slid it into place, made a note in the catalog, and moved on to the next thing. That was all. That was enough. The work was the work. It had always been the work, underneath everything else, and she could feel it now, the rightness of it, the modest, durable satisfaction of things being in their correct place, maintained by someone who cares about them not because of what they are adjacent to, but because of what they are. She pressed her fingers briefly against the spine of the green folder. Then, she took her hand away and let it be where it belonged. Outside the reading room window, April was doing what April does, changing its mind every 20 minutes between rain and sun, uncertain and alive, and Charlotte Bellamy stood in the quiet of a room full of carefully kept things and was, for the first time in a long time, simply where she was.